welcome our 6 writers who will read today in the following order: Lilija Valis, Leila Kulpas, Rosemary Keevil, Adrienne Drobnies, Sylvia Taylor, and Patricia Corbett. All right, are we all set? First of all, the rules are the same as last month. Please take 1 minute to introduce yourself, your name, where you live, or what you do, whatever you want to say, and just tell us a little bit of what you read from, just to let us enter your story, just so that we can know a little bit what you are reading from. Then read for a maximum of 7 minutes. So, everybody is agreed? Yes? Everybody is ready? Our first reader is Lilija Valis. Lilija, where are you?
My name is Lilija Valis. I'm born in Lithuania and lived on 3 continents. I live in Vancouver now, and I seem to have in my work been drawn to civil rights work, helping the poor, and then post-traumatic stress people and so on. So I'm reading from my memoir, The Road Out. However, I have to apologize. I have trouble writing in prose. I've been writing poetry for such a long time, on and off, that it just came out with a certain rhythm. So that's where it belongs, a poem. The Road Out. The road out of town was unpaved, past farms, then wild fields, eventually a forest on the east side. We were heading south, away from the icy north, bypassing the sea to the west, as invaders from the east poured into Lithuania, our homeland, a small Baltic country, 3 million people, historically at the mercy of the empire to the east, 170 million Russians. We were alone on the road, a young family, my mother wheeling a baby carriage with my newborn sister inside, me, 4 years old, hanging on to the side of the pram, my father carrying 2 bags of whatever was thought essential on the way to the unknown in the troubled South, where Germany, after losing her war, was adjusting to an enforced peace, which sounded pretty good to us, better than what we were fleeing: theft, executions, bombings. So here we were on the road out, leaving behind what we knew and loved. A noise behind us made us turn around. A small, light-colored plane was circling toward us, a toy-like plane. Looked friendly to me. They want to say hello, I said, and waved to the plane. Don't, warned my father. The plane started to lower. My father ordered, into the woods. Mother grabbed my sister. Out of the pram, I took a hold of her skirt, and we all ran, stumbling past bushes and fallen branches to get to the tree protection. We could hear the plane's motor closing in. We pushed deeper into the woods until we could see no sky. We came to an opening among the trees and saw a large crater in the earth, surrounded by ruptured trees. A bomb, said my father. We have to be out of sight. He pushed us deeper into the woods. The plane continued to search for us. I learned invaders pursue anyone trying to escape, even a newborn. We continued to walk through the forest parallel to the road. Eventually, the plane gave up and turned back to wherever they were scheduled to do their part in the invasion. When we made sure the sky was clear, we turned to the road. From then on, my mother carried my sister in her arms on the rest of our journey. We passed a burning town to the west. Other people fleeing the invasion joined us, heading south. Those familiar with the area took over leadership to guide us through a dangerous part of the woods we had to cross. It was famous for its swamps, which sank travelers to their deaths if they stepped into them. A long journey, it was a long journey. We rested at various makeshift refugee camps and witnessed the breakdown of people. I remember one woman pointing to an empty sky as she screamed, "A plane! Can you see the plane? It's coming to kill us." We finally reached safety in a Bavarian town with a castle on a hill. Then we were taken to Italy, where we joined other refugees, waiting for a ship to take us to far-off countries for new lives. The plane, however, that followed us on the road never left me. It visited periodically, calmly, with a message that took a long time for me to understand. I mean, of course, my continuing to wave at what looked like friendly spirits gone by. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Escaping from your country is a traumatic experience, right? Says she who knows. So
Yes.
you describe it so dramatically. Is it a book, or is it going to be a book?
This is the first chapter.
So you just continue.
Yes.
You make it a very dramatic scene. It's wonderful. Okay, thank you very much, Leila. Thank you. Our
Thank you.
next reader is Leila Kulpas. Leila, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
This is an excerpt from chapter 2 of my book, Into the Eyes of Hungry, Growing Up in the Wilds of Australia. It's a memoir times 17, available from Amazon. It was a finalist in the Book Excellence Awards. I refer to my mother as the pale one and to my father as the tall one. It is written in the present tense. This chapter's A Forest of Horses' Legs. 3 years old, I'm sitting on the floor of the veranda at Pod's place, where we live. It's hot, but the boards are cool on the backs of my legs. On one side of me are steps leading down to a dirt yard, where hens in shallow depressions ruffle their feathers and chatter to one another. They're dust bathing, the pale one has told me, and the air around them is golden with dust. One day, while I'm alone on the veranda, I make my way slowly down the steps. I have to, excuse me, my light's giving me trouble. I'm going to have to use this, which makes me look very pale. Okay. One day when I'm alone on the veranda, I make my way slowly down the steps, and the first slap across the feet slap across the warm ground. The hens stop ruffling their feathers, cock their heads on one side, and make quack, quack, quack noises as if they're trying to tell me something. Slabs of splintery wood stop me. Through a gap between them, I see what looks like the brown, black, cream, and orange trunks of trees in a forest. But then I see that they're horses' legs moving this way and that in a dirt yard. A squeal comes from high among them. 2 legs lift off the ground, bend, and stamp back down again. Pressing my face against the splinters, I see, a little way away, the big brown shape of Hungry, the tall one's horse. I crawl through between the slabs and stand up, and the feet wind me round the horses till I'm in front of him. The bag with his food in it over his nose, his head dips down to me, the long, soft-looking brown things on the top of his head turning. He rumbles, then sighs, his huge brown eyes, full of love, gaze at me through strands of black hair. Wanting to be in those eyes, I move closer until his feed bag is resting on my head, massaging my head. Delicious sensations, soft crunching sounds. Then other sounds slowly separate into words. Leila, called over and over. I lean out and look up and over. On the veranda, the tall one in his hat, the pale one shorter and Pod shorter still, all looking down at me. But what's wrong? There are sharps in the tall one's voice. Stay where you are. Don't move. I'm coming to get you. Don't go near his hooves, the pale one yells. Stay where you are. And in a low voice, for God's sake, surely to God, she, hungry, those great hooves, cranky bugger when he's eating, why on earth, she. I'm happy and safe in this space close to Hungry with the lovely rubbing. The tall one's hat bobs down the steps, and in moments he's above me, his strong arms lifting me onto his shoulder. I glide over horses' backs, brown, black, and cream and orange, out the gate and up the steps. He deposits me on the veranda. The pale one squats next to me, a glimpse of blue eyes before I look down, her hand warming my back. The pretty voice. You mustn't go into the yard with the horses by yourself. I know you like Hungry, but when he's eating, he can get awfully cranky, and he stamps his feet. And if one of those great big hooves landed on you, that'd be the end of you, she said, shaking her head. He wouldn't mean to hurt you, but he could by accident. He's an awful pig. She gives me a gentle shake. Look at me. Blue eyes stare into mine, and her voice becomes hard. Do you understand what I just told you? You must never go into the horse yard by yourself, ever again. Promise me now. Understand? Promise? I nod my head. Yeah, but I know I was safe there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Leila. You said it was chapter 2 of your book?
Yeah.
And you were 3 years old in this chapter.
Yes.
So there will be many more chapters?
Oh yes, it's a sort of normal sized book. It's available on Amazon.
Ah, fun. And what is the title of the book again, please?
Into the Eyes of Hungry.
Into the Eyes of Hungry. Okay, I will look it up.
Growing up in the wilds of Australia.
Or Australia. Okay, thank you very much. Wonderful piece, wonderful piece. Thank you. Our next reader is Rosemary Keevil. Rosemary, you are on.
Have I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Just getting organized here. Okay. I live in Worcester and I'm a journalist. I cut my teeth news reporting for CTV. And I was a host of a current affairs radio program for Chum, the Chum Network, and the managing editor of a professional women's magazine. Life dealt me a couple of hard blows. In 1991, my husband died of cancer and my brother died of AIDS, and the children were 2 and 5, and both men were 41. And then 6 years later, I succumbed to drugs and alcohol for 6 years. Then I got clean and sober in 2002. Eventually, because I was a journalist and I had things to write about, I wrote a memoir, and it's called The Art of Losing It, which you can see behind me.
Yes.
Memoir of Grief and Addiction. And it was published in 2020. Part 1 is about grief and loss, and part 2 is about addiction and recovery. Now, instead of one long reading, I've done 4 short readings because there's so many different elements to the book.
Excuse me, who is the publisher of your book?
She Writes Press.
Okay, right. Okay, go ahead.
Out of the States. So all you need to know for the first reading is that Dixie is 2 years old and Barry is my husband. I'm going to need my glasses. Details. Okay. One evening, when I'm having trouble settling Dixie, and all I want to do is sleep myself, I decide to leave Dixie crying for a bit and hope she will calm down on her own. I'm headed down the hall to our bedroom when I hear Barry call out in pain. I rush into the room. He's in bed, lying on one side, but propping himself up with his right elbow, so he has a direct sight line to the door. When he sees me, he says, "Honey, I'm dying." I rush over and sit beside him. "You really are in so much pain, aren't you? Can I help? Can you lie down all the way?" "No, it hurts to move," he says. "My head is screaming and I can't sleep." "What can I do? Shall I get some more painkillers? If I run you a bath, could you sit in it? Would it help?" I don't know. I just took some tramadol. He gingerly starts to move onto his back, and I help to lower him. Oh, he says, that's a bit better. My head isn't screaming as much. It's settled to a dull roar. Maybe a bath will help. Thanks so much, sweetie. I love you, he tells me. I'm glad you're on my team. You are my life. And the next reading is the girls are 2 and 5 years old, and Barry is about to be taken to the hospital for some final tests because he's on his way out. I think I need some different glasses. Pardon me. Technical difficulties. I lie beside Barry on, oh no, Willow and Dixie are looking out the front window as the ambulance pulls into the driveway, mesmerized by the big white and red vehicle with a red light on top, which is not flashing, that has come to take their daddy away. My motherly instincts make me desperately want to shelter them from all of this, but I can't. I can't cushion them from this harsh reality. I watch them watch the ambulance attendants readying the gurney. I see 2 little girls grappling with a tangle of new emotions, and I know their innocence will shield them for only so long. This is something none of us can escape from, and it will leave an indelible mark on our souls. It's almost as difficult watching them flounder as it is watching my husband die. What must this be like for their little 2-year-old and 5-year-old minds and hearts? What are they thinking? As if she hears my ponderings, Willow looks up at me and says, "Is Daddy going to die today?" So now I'm going to part 2, which is about addiction and my time in rehab and my first year of recovery. And this is about an appointment with my spiritual counselor. Her name is Sheena. She talks gently, her words emerging slowly from her like thick cream, the kind you get at high tea with crumpets and strawberry preserves. She has luminous blue eyes that seem to peer right into my soul. I feel exposed but protected at the same time. I speak up. I drank a lot of wine, took a couple of sleeping pills, and drove the kids, my girls. They're only 13 and 15. I did $4,000 worth of damage to the clutch on the car. I pause and shake my head and let the tears gush out as I finish my confession. I almost lost the family dog and I blacked out at the wheel. It's a miracle I didn't have an accident. Then I got a letter from the police that I was seen driving erratically. I'm wondering, well, I pause and wonder exactly what I am wondering. I get up my nerve and finish my thought. Do you think I need a spiritual retreat? Keeping her eyes on mine, Sheila rolls her chair closer, so she's about 3 feet from me. I've squeezed myself into the corner of what feels like the proverbial psychiatrist's couch. Rosemary, what about rehab? She asks. And then this last reading is from the epilogue of the book. When Dave broke things off, I almost called Dimitri, my go-to sex between relationships Greek stud, to assuage the pain from this latest blow. But then it occurred to me this was likely an unhealthy coping mechanism, an old behavior that I'd always used to alter my negative emotions. And Graham's words echoed in my head. If nothing changes, nothing changes. Try to do the next right thing, Rosemary. I knew the next right thing to do was not to call Dimitri. I didn't, and I was proud of myself. It continued to be difficult and painful with the girls. I had so much to learn, and I'm still learning over 18 years later. I still struggle with saying no to them, and they are adults with their own successful lives now. How each of them got there is their story to tell or not. Sometimes I felt as if Barry's death were a life sentence. Would any of this have happened if he had not died? When he was dying, I assumed naively that I would eventually settle into a normal life. But that never happened. Life just got more and more tough. I also assumed everything would get back to normal after I got sober, but life continued to be challenging. Gradually, my daughters and I have learned healthier coping mechanisms, but we are still works in progress. I know I cannot change the past. I know I will never lose my sadness over the death of my husband and the death of my brother. I will also never lose the guilt I have over how I parented the girls in the absence of their dad. But I have acceptance. It's what I'm doing about it now that matters today. So I'll just end with a quote from my dentist. After he read my memoir, he said to me, "Rosemary, now I know why you grind your teeth."
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Rosemary. It must be very difficult to write about family traumas and your own. Did you find the writing very painful or cathartic?
Both.
Both.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but you were nevertheless determined to go over it and put it down.
It was because it was therapeutic.
It was therapeutic.
Yeah.
Okay, it's good
Yeah.
to hear. And you are a happy woman today, and no addiction. And
Yes, well, yes, I've been clean and
Yes.
sober since 2002. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Congratulations. Okay, thank you, Rosemary. All right, our next reader is Adrienne Drobnies, and after Adrienne, Ian Rodriguez. So Adrienne, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Adrienne Drobnies. I live in Vancouver. I am a retired scientist, and my first book of poetry, which is called Salt and Ashes, came
Ashes,
out years ago. It won the Fred Kerner Award from the Canadian Authors Association for the best book of that year. I mostly write poetry, but recently I started writing a memoir piece, and I'd like to share some excerpts of that with you.
Wonderful.
My first trip to Mexico. I am staying for a few weeks in Oaxaca after 10 days in Mexico City with a music group. There we learn songs in Zapoteca from this region and from Michoacan, where the original mariachis come from, as well as music from Veracruz. We also had what I called the torture by fandango. Around 2 p.m. one day, we went to a primary school, and while locked inside a courtyard, had a musicology lecture and learned a few dances. Then the band started up. 8 hours later, we were getting tired with no sign of an end to the festivities. I went with a few friends for a margarita at a nearby bar. We came back and were told the bus would be there in 40 minutes, then another 40, then another. I was later told fandangos can last for days. My first exposure to Spanish was before and after school in second grade, when my mother dropped me off before her shifts at the hospital, or I walked after school to stay with Mr. and Mrs. Gonzalez and their children about my age, Alma and Manuel. They taught me to count to 10 in Spanish, but I didn't learn much more. In the mornings before school, we got cream of wheat, which I hated, but there was a little circle of sugar and cinnamon in the middle that made it palatable enough that I would eat a few bites. That year, Mrs. Gonzalez had her third child, and I went with them to the baptism. When I was with the family on Friday afternoon, which happens sometimes, we had fish in accordance with their Catholic practice. I found it awful and felt it definitely fell into the category of a sacrifice. When Mr. Gonzalez was there, as he was at dinner time, we all kept quiet. Everyone was a little afraid of him. I don't remember him ever smiling, but Mrs. Gonzalez was kind. When I was 8, my family took its first vacation. We drove from Austin to Monterey. I was allowed to take my friend Karen. Her father was a psychiatrist, and my mother knew him because she was a psychiatric nurse at the Texas State Mental Hospital when that institution was thriving. We stayed in a hotel which seemed very grand and had lots of marble. Karen and I had our own room next to my parents'. Karen and I played a game that involved imagining I couldn't walk and then was cured. I began shouting as I had seen in movies, "I can walk, I can walk." My mother came over and told me I'd get a spanking if I didn't shut up. I don't remember much from that trip, just cultural cliches of embroidered shawls, castanets and maracas, burros and men in white with embroidered belts and sombreros, a chocolate whisk, a Mayan calendar, mariachis. I do remember from local people a kind of assiduous attention to me as a child that felt unfamiliar. Things always seemed to be happening outdoors and at night. When I was a baby, I cried so much and so energetically, my father thought it amusing to nickname me Ixtacihuatl, after the volcano situated between Mexico City and Puebla. The word means white woman in Nahuatl because of its 4 snow-capped peaks, which are thought to look like the head, chest, knees, and feet of a sleeping woman. Its twin peak is Popocatépetl, or Smoking Mountain. The Aztec legend tells of a princess in love with one of her father's warriors, Popocatépetl. He was sent off to war in Oaxaca, and the princess, Itztaccíhuatl, was falsely told he had died in battle, after which she died of grief. Popocatépetl returned to find his beloved dead and placed her body at its current site, where the gods covered them in snow and changed them into mountains. Sometimes Ixtaccíhuatl is called La Mujer Dormida, or Sleeping Woman. Popocatépetl is the one raging and raining fire on the earth. As I grew, the nickname was shortened for a while to sound like ecstasy, and then finally landed on Exy, which is the name I was exclusively known by until about 3rd grade. Sometimes people in my family just called me X, which I suppose is a good nickname for the daughter of a mathematician. Mrs. Gonzalez and Alma and Manuel must have called me Exy. Whether they knew its Nahuatl origins or not, I can't say. Perhaps Mrs. Gonzalez also sometimes called me Niña, or Corrida, or Chiquita. Perhaps she gave me a little love then when I needed it very badly. When I stand in the middle of the ancient plaza at Monte Alban, near Oaxaca, very early in the morning before anyone else has arrived, perhaps I feel that tenderness in my blood. Thank you.
Wonderful, Adrienne. What made you switch from poetry to, you probably have not switched. You will continue with poetry, right?
I will. I find the narrative impulse grows stronger as we age. And I particularly, I started a few years back when I went on a retreat where I was focusing on poetry, but I realized I wanted to write stories, but with a more humorous, but still serious character.
Mm-hmm. It's very challenging to write poetry and also write prose. It's a different approach, right? Your head works differently, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, continue both ways. Okay, continue both ways. Thank you very much for sharing. Thank you. All right, Ian, are you there? Ian Rodriguez is our next reader. Ian.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi.
Great, thank you. So my reading is I'm a Canadian citizen, but I served in the U.S. military. Went to high school in Lillooet. So my stories and my collection is about people who are not Americans but serving in the U.S. military from various countries. And one of my places is getting published in Onward Press. But the piece I'm reading is unpublished, but will be part of the same collection. So this piece is called Owankale. It's an African last name.
Excuse me, so this is a short story?
Yes, that's right.
Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, Owankale. This is from an excerpt from Owankale. Owankale is her last name. I met her under some tall concrete ramps in Afghanistan. I wouldn't call these ramps robust, but rows of trucks and tractors rolled over our heads on them, continuously on their way to transport back stateside. We would pressure wash all the undercarriages from below, knocking down brown torrents of grease mixed with desert sand. The work was grueling. For me, it was a chance to work in the daylight under cool water so I could sleep in the cooler nights. I first talked to Owankale when I'd snuck under the ramps where she was spraying to get some respite from Jolin, a lanky and dark-haired non-commissioned officer from the back of Missouri, as he loved saying. He would come over yelling if the sound of pressure washing in a wash bay stopped intermittently. He couldn't see everything from where he had hung camo netting over chairs and staged an ice box with cold sodas behind his personal Humvee. Longer silences in a one-set down were assumed to be bathroom breaks. Owankale was working in the bay next to me that day. I told her I needed to take off my boots and sit down for a while. She shrugged and reminded me to keep up against the ramps so Jolin wouldn't spot me under here. I sat down on the wet concrete to pull off my soaking boots and wring water from my socks. The strong heat felt good on my feet, even if for a few minutes. I only knew that Owankale worked at headquarters as an engineer's aide. Why was she working here, I wondered. I hadn't talked to her before. I had been mostly working nights in the camp tire shop before this job and rarely went to headquarters. We chatted briefly about where we were from. She found out I grew up in Saskatoon, while I learned she had lived in New York for a while after moving to the States from Port Harcourt, Nigeria. I was happy to get to know another non-American in the unit and another person on the crew who usually avoided the nightly card games and movies Jolin hosted in his air-conditioned tent. We made each other laugh, imitating the other guys on our crew vying for the attentions of Tackmeyer and Griffiths. They were two younger non-NCOs who worked with us and always hung around Jolin's tent in the evenings. Owankale entranced me with her laugh. It would spark with her eyes and spread through her smile, curving uproariously through her body and ending with her fingers brushing her nose. Our first time talking ended too soon when Jolin hollered, "Tress, get the F back in your bay." My last name is Tresseria. The spraying went on 24/7 to return thousands of unneeded vehicles. I changed my break to match Owankale's and go with her to the chow tent for lunch and dinner. Jolin didn't give a shit as long as he had bodies to keep the washing bays running over day shift. She always ate the greasy cheeseburgers, beef lasagna, and other slop as if they were proper meals, carefully sawing the stuff into dainty mouthfuls with her butter knife. No one I grew up with ate like this, and I mostly listened to her. She loved playing soccer. I later became friends with her friends on the team she had formed to play against the third country nationals in camp. These third country nationals were an assortment of Filipinos, Pakistanis, and others who were contracted to do cooking and cleaning at the camp. The people in Owankale's soccer team were mostly foreigners in the US military like us. There was an older NCO from Ghana, a couple of guys from Portugal, a Costa Rican woman, and an American-Irish guy who was surprisingly the shortest of us. I'm not good at soccer, though it was fun to play. I now realize Owankale had always let me play forward. She was amazing at soccer. She was tall and fast. Whenever we played soccer against the third country nationals, they would always win. Though she almost rallied us to victory a couple of times. A few weeks after I started playing, a couple of third country nationals were quietly executed for mixing glass into our scrambled eggs. The games were stopped. Whoever they were, Owankale thought, they got off easy. She told me that getting shot from that close is just painless. I somewhat believed her at the time, though I have since dreamt otherwise, of blood-streaked brown skin, the last noises humans make, and white eggs shining slowly in plastic rows under the sun. There was a place on camp with dozens and dozens of unused concrete barricades stacked up haphazardly. Some were broken. Owankale and our ex-soccer team people would meet there at night to talk and smoke about our plans after our plans. Owankale was going back to Nigeria after finishing college in New York. She had started college there but stopped when the costs got too high. She said she wanted to go back to do some good thing for her country. She was probably in her mid-30s at the time. One of the guys from Portugal wanted to go to the top culinary arts program at Johnson & Wales in Rhode Island after he got American citizenship. I told them I was thinking of college in the UK after getting out or returning to Canada. Owankale told me that school isn't any cheaper in the UK. She had friends back in Nigeria that had studied there. Besides, the GI Bill wouldn't cover anything over there, she reminded me. It's just a dream, I said to her. I'll finish my contract and study philosophy at Oxford or something. They'll hire me as a scholar. Everyone leaned against the concrete and laughed.
Thank you very much, Ian. What is it going to be at the end? A collection of short stories about your life in the military?
Yeah, that's right.
And how far along are you?
I have approximately 4 out of 6 written, and one's going to be published separately.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you very much for sharing. Was it overall a good experience, or a happy life, or a sad life?
I think certainly there were trials and tribulations, but I met some interesting people, and for that, I think it was a good experience.
Yes, because you mentioned a number of interesting people in the piece that you read. And so, keep doing it, because that you had an opportunity to meet people from all over the world, right?
Yes. And
okay. Thank you very much for sharing with us. Thank you. Our next reader is Sylvia Taylor. Sylvia.
Hi, thanks so much. My apologies, everyone. My computer camera is on the blink tonight, so I'll just be reading by audio.
Yes.
I'm happy to share with you this evening several very short excerpts from my 2 traditionally published books, both of them published by Heritage House in Victoria. And the 2 books are called, the first one was called The Fisher Queen, and it is a historical memoir of the commercial salmon fishing industry and of my experiences within that, in my early 20s. The second book is called Beckoned by the Sea, and it's a memoir plus a biography pieces of 24 women who devoted their lives and their purposes to working with the sea. So I'd like to start with my first short piece from Beckoned by the Sea. I know the moment the sea called me. I was born in an island nation. My first memory is as a toddler, standing thigh-deep in the chilly North Sea waters of England's east coast on a pebbly gray beach, looking out at the endless gray horizon and down at my sturdy little legs braced against the wavelets. I turned to see my vivacious young mum and her sister chatting on the picnic blanket, 2 Mediterranean flowers in their summer dresses, their bright smiles and happy waves beckoning me. I am suddenly aware of my separateness, and instead of waddling to shore, I turn back again to the water in the direction of my father's Nordic forebears who loved the sea and were forever drawn to it. As a child, I yearned to join the mermaids and the other sea creatures. I would create my own personal ocean in the bottom of our clawfoot bathtub, strewn with shells and pebbles. My coltish legs stuffed into one pajama leg. I unraveled my long braids and blissfully wafted under the water. Next piece is coming from my first book, when I'm preparing to go out to sea as a deckhand on a commercial salmon trolling ship in northern BC. At 7:15 a.m., I untied the midships rope and leaned into the heavy wooden hull to see and ease her bulk from the float, tucked the toe of my grubby sneaker into a scupper and gave the wharf a little good riddance shove as I swung my leg over the bulwarks and onto the newly oiled deck. My feet wouldn't touch home again for 4 months, and that was more than fine by me. We would catch the outgoing tide that would sweep us away from this blue-collar corner of the yachty Granville Island boat basin, out into False Creek that rippled into the salty heart of the city, under the bridges and past the glittering towers and endless beaches and muscular green mountains, out past the deep-sea freighters tethered in Burrard Inlet, past the lighthouses and markers and buoys, then north and more north, until we reached the fishing grounds 400 miles away. We left on a watery West Coast morning, all soft and gray and silent. Pussy willow days, I'd called them, since I'd first stood on this Vancouver wharf, clutching my dad's meaty figure in one hand and a spray of velvety gray buds in the other. And this is coming from the same book, but as the epilogue. I'm where I've been so many times before, alone on a windswept beach. I always know what to do here. I always know who I am here. This is no Technicolor Tahitian dream beach. It is Canada's wild western coast, my home, my lifeblood. I am soaked to the marrow with it and can't live without it. Every cell of me sighs with relief. The land and sea have gifted me a perfect moon shell. I have found others, but they are broken. I almost discard them, but glance again and realize that if they were not broken, I could not see the symmetry and beauty of the design, the perfect and elegant spiraling to the center. I'm in a paradise of cedar and sand and wind and waves and fresh rushing water. Hunkered down in a little trailer, so much like a boat, beside a stream under the cedar trees in Powell River, a sturdy town in BC's Sunshine Coast. The sun flashes its most engaging smile. The stream flings itself to the sea. The gods have conspired to seduce a book out of me. On the ferry from Vancouver, I had stood transfixed in front of the gift store book rack. My colleague, who is here with me to mentor and teach the emerging Powell River writers, said, "This is where your book will be." I wanted to see it there so bad it tugged at my guts. And lastly, I will forever be deeply connected to how the land and sea talk to us. I will always know when something is coming. I'll look up and scan the skies and sniff the wind on a wild mountaintop or a frenetic cityscape and murmur that it's shifted to slack. Get ready for it. Those who know me will pay attention. The Wild West has gone to its condos and fish farms, yet still, nature insists on being heard. I'm older, plumper, shrewder, and a little road weary, but my gypsy soul still leaps and flings its irreverent laugh all about the place. I went to sea and met my Sissugal, faced my horror, faced my fear, and answered the call that drew me through my journey home to the mother stream that is me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Very lyrical. What is going to happen to this writing from now on?
Oh, they're both in books.
I'm sorry?
You mean the writing from the two books?
Yes.
I'm not sure what you mean by what will happen to them.
I mean, what you have now read, has it already been published or is it about?
Yes, those are, at the beginning I mentioned that they come from two traditionally published books.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah,
yes.
published by Heritage House in Victoria.
Uh-huh.
And they were published 4 years ago and 7 years ago.
Uh-huh. And do you continue to write in the same vein?
I've actually now, I was, a journalist for some years and now have turned my hand to poetry. And so I'm currently writing and gathering together a collection of what I hope will be a future book of poetry.
Ah, you are the second person today who writes prose and poetry.
Yes.
Please watch out for our announcements because we are going to have an open mic for poets later this spring. Okay.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So those
Yeah.
of you who write poetry, in addition to writing prose, you are invited to join us. You will be invited to join us again. Okay, thank you very much, Sylvia. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, Patricia Corbett, you are on.
Can you hear me?
Yes?
Yes. Oh, good. Okay. My nom de plume is Patricia Corbett Bowman. And I've had 3 books published that were young adult fiction. But now this I'm going to read today is from my teaching memoirs. And this is not a very happy chapter, and the content may be too graphic for young readers, if there are any out there. The title of this chapter is My Principal Arrested, so that may give you a clue. He was a very pleasant, soft-spoken man. He had been my daughter's principal and knew me from my volunteer work at her school. So when he hired me for my first full-time job at the Board of Education, I felt favorably toward him. We would often chat about parents and students when I was on yard duty, and he was doing an inspection of the grounds. I taught there for a couple of years before any of us noticed things weren't quite right. A Tuesday morning after a long weekend, Mr. A didn't show up for work. The staff room was buzzing. The secretary couldn't locate him at home, and the director of education had called asking where he was. He'd missed an important meeting. The next day, as I read news, at breakfast, I discovered why he had been absent. Mr. A had been arrested for stealing bags of mulch at the local nursery on the holiday Monday. The store had been closed. A witness called the police and reported his license plate. He was picked up on Tuesday morning, charged, and a court appointment at a later date was set. Mr. A returned to school on Wednesday. I passed him in the hallway, going to his office, and asked, "Are you okay? I heard about your problem on the news." He explained it was just a misunderstanding. He was going to return to the store and pay for the bags the next day, but he had been arrested before he left the house. I commiserated with him and then continued on to my class. Some months later, an article in the local paper said he had been fined. This was never openly discussed at school by Mr. A. A friend of mine who lived next door to one of the board's superintendents said Mr. A was supposed to have made an apology to the assembled school. No such thing occurred. This was the last of Mr. A's indiscretions, or so I thought. On several occasions during the day, I would hear the secretary politely asking over the PA for Mr. A to report to the office, call her, or notify her of his whereabouts. By the third or fourth announcement, she'd bark this out as an order. Her patience tried. In the staff room at lunch, I jokingly asked if she had lost the principal. She reported Mr. A would go missing for hours and never say where he was going or what time he'd return. At first, she would cover for him if the board called to ask why he'd missed a meeting. Exasperated, after providing several excuses, she finally started telling the truth. She didn't know where the hell he was. Mr. A and I had scheduled an early morning meeting with the parents of a child in my grade 1 class who was having speech development delays. Present were the two parents, the speech pathologist, and myself. We waited for Mr. A, but he didn't show. I started the meeting in his absence and made the parents aware of the difficulties the child was having. The pathologist recommended what we, the school, could do for him. About 5 minutes before first bell, Mr. A sauntered into the conference room and frowned when he saw us. What were we doing there? I explained what we had discussed, and then I had to run to my classroom as the students would be piling in. He thanked me and said he would take over, and he did. Further reports of his forgetting meetings and his absences were bantered about. As I entered the school early one morning, shortly after this, I heard an announcement that all teachers should report to the staff room immediately. On my way, I met other teachers heading there. None of us knew what the meeting was about. When we were all gathered, the area superintendent demanded our attention as he entered by raising his arm. I was standing at the back of the room, leaning against the wall, as all the chairs and couches were occupied by the time I got there. We were told Mr. A, our quiet principal, had been arrested. Shoplifting crossed my mind. The superintendent said Mr. A had been picked up in a pedophile ring and charged with sexual interference, buggery, and a slew of other indecent acts with minors. When I heard this, I had to catch myself from sliding down the wall. No wonder people say, "Are you sitting down?" when they impart bad news. The media had been alerted and would soon be roaming about outside the school with questions. We were not to talk to them or even discuss this amongst ourselves in the school or on the grounds. The super said the police had notified him. A boy of 16, a street kid, had reported to them when picked up on another charge that he went to sex parties with men at this big house. Pornographic movies were shot there. The boy led them to Mr. A's house and described the recreation room in the basement where these acts with underage boys had been committed. Several videotapes were confiscated during the raid. All organizations, from priests to Boy Scouts to teachers, have pedophiles in their midst, it seems. Now our own principal had been caught. Why were these men always middle-aged? Had they been doing this for years and thought they'd never be found out? I mentioned earlier in this book that a principal had advised me a couple of times to not report some suspected child abuse cases. This was the same principal. I'm glad I had ignored him and went ahead and called Family and Children's Services. My gut instincts were right. The news was filled with stories of Mr. A and other men named in the arrest for a couple of weeks. Things calmed down after that. A new principal was appointed. Many months later, I read in the newspaper that Mr. A had been sentenced to 4 years in prison. Much later, another teacher and I were chatting in the staff room, and she told me a cousin of hers owned a gas station in another town. Guess who was pumping gas there as part of his parole? Yes, Mr. A. He had served only 18 months. Got off early for good behavior. I never heard anything about him ever again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What a powerful story. One reads stories like that every now and then in the news, in the media, right? So it's just one of many instances, and probably the only one in your school?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what happened afterwards?
Well, that was it. He went to jail, was sentenced with 4 years and just served 18 months.
And
then
that was the end of it?
That was the end. That's all we ever heard of it. There was nothing ever reported in the newspaper.
And there were no other bad incidents in your school ever again?
Well, there were some incidences, but not to do with pedophiles. And those are in my book, but it's unpublished at this time.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's some humor in my book too. Don't want you to think everything is like that.
What is the title of your book?
Behind the Classroom Door.
Behind the Classroom Door.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I will look it up. Thank you, Patricia.
It's not published. Okay.
Pardon me?
It's not published yet.
But will be published.
I hope. I haven't got a publisher yet for this one.
Yes. Okay. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you very much. So this is the end. Then we are out of time. What a fantastic array of topics and styles and powerful and thoughtful writing we've heard. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing. I hope you realize that when you come here and share, you help yourself, but you also help other writers, okay? That's what CAA stands for, Writers Helping Writers. It's very useful and helpful to you as writers and as thinkers to read aloud, because the words come alive. It's one thing to put them on paper or on the screen, but then it's quite another to read it to your family, to your friends, to your beta readers, to come here and share your reading with us. So a huge thanks to all of you. And please just go on with whatever you're doing, whatever you're writing, just push the envelope the best you can. I have a short announcement, a short promo to tell you that we meet again on Zoom in April, on April 22nd. not on a Wednesday, but on a Monday, April 22nd. And we will have a special guest, a writer who spent years and years writing his autobiography, and he failed. He couldn't do it. And when he failed and couldn't do it, he decided not to discard the material, but to use the material to write a novel. And the novel ended up on the short list of the Giller Prize. So he will come to tell us what happened to him and how he did it and how he survived. So it's Monday, April 22nd. Invitations will be going out to you within the next week. Please join us, and it will be a fabulous evening. Once again, my very great thanks. Thank you all for being here, for coming, for reading, for listening, and for supporting our writers. Thank you, and good night, everybody. Good night. Thank you.